Hello, I'm Philip Burton, and in this video we will look at various answers to the question, what is a pivot table? Well, a pivot table is a summary of data contained in an Excel spreadsheet. In my source data, I have a dataset with 253 rows containing details of some CDs and other audio files. This is perfect data to use for a pivot table. Your data source can just be a few rows, or it can be hundreds or thousands of rows. To be honest, the more the better. Pivot tables are a deduplicator. They allow you to deduplicate items in a list. So suppose you've got these 253 rows of audio files coming from 20 different albums. Well, an Excel pivot table would allow you to see very quickly those 20 albums or any other analysis you might want. An Excel pivot table is time saving. In order to see these 20 albums and to create a pivot table, all you have to do is highlight the data, go to Insert, and then Create Pivot Table. After clicking OK, this then creates a new spreadsheet with a Pivot Tables fields pane. Now all we've got to do is drag and drop the album field from the pivot tables field lists into the row fields at the bottom of this new pivot table field panes. Notice what's going to happen on the left hand side. And that's it. I've now created a pivot table and started my analysis with just a few seconds work. What else are pivot tables? Well, pivot tables allow you to count the number of entries. So not just the album names, but how many times they occur. And I can do this by just adding the field into the values area. Now we can see how many entries there are per album, together with a grand total. The above might seem a lot of steps, but it's something that I can do in less than a minute. However, if you're not sure what might be important in your data, then you can make it even easier for yourself by going to Insert, Recommended Pivot Tables. This can generate a list of suggested pivot tables. However, my advice is this is probably a good way to start with pivot tables if you're unsure of the data, but sometimes it doesn't suggest anything useful, sadly. Now, when it does work, it may give you some useful examples. For example, if you're running a store, your sales data might be the number of items sold. So your recommended pivot tables could be the total sales per salesperson, for instance, or the number of items sold per country. Pivot tables allow you to error check. Suppose you had a situation where you had two albums, a musical offering with two Fs and one with only one F and a typographical error. A pivot table analysis would allow you to instantly spot this error, allowing you to correct the data. You can then sort the results by album order or by number of occurrences. To do this, you go to Home, and in the editing section you can see Sort and Filter. So here you can sort. So if you've got an item with, say, 10 entries, 13 entries, it may well be genuine, but one with just one entry, that may be cause for investigating to see whether there is a typo which needs correcting. It's not formula intensive. If I was creating a similar calculation to this in using Excel formulas, then I would have to be using multiple countif or countifs functions, or I would be using an array formula. However, by doing this in a pivot table, you get a quick answer at the time of its creation. If the data changes, then the pivot table remains unchanged. It doesn't automatically recalculate. Now this can be bad because now the analysis is outdated, and placing reliance on an outdated analysis may lead you to wrong conclusions. However, this can be good because Excel is not spending time continually re-evaluating these formulas. It can therefore reduce the amount of time Excel needs to calculate its formulas. Now, when your analysis does need to be updated, you can do this easily by right-clicking on the pivot table and selecting Refresh. And here we have our new entry. You can also do this by going to PivotTable Analyze and refresh. Your pivot table will then change based on the latest data. Suppose you wanted to create an analysis based on the album's name and the date of purchase. Well, that's no problem for a pivot table. All we need to do is drag the date purchase field into the raw field as well. So now you can see more information. And when you drag a date field into the rows area from Excel 2013 or later, then we do have the years, quarters, and date purchased added as well. So in this way, we can get a summary for each album and an analysis per year, which we can drill down into quarter and month. Now, if that's more fields than you want, then you can always remove them. You can either drag the fields out of the rows section or right and click on them and go to remove field. Now you can also use this menu for things like changing the order of the fields. Move up, move to the beginning, but you can also do that by dragging them. Now, for now, what I will do is just leave this with album and then years. Pivot tables are customizable. There are 3 different ways of viewing the pivot table analysis, which is especially useful when you are viewing an analysis with more than one field. The standard view that you can see here is called the compact form. All of the rows are shown in one column, which you can see is headed row labels. The second view is called outline form. Now all of these row fields are in separate columns. The totals, which are shown, are generally above the data that it totals. A third view, which I use more often, is the tabular form. Now the data is shown and then the total. And you can go between these different forms by going to Pivot Table Design, and you can see these in Report Layout. You can also add conditional formatting. In this way, you can have bars behind the numbers, so you can see graphically how many items there are for each row. To do this, highlight the values and go to Home, Styles, and Conditional Formatting Data Bars. You can select what colour you want for your data bars. Alternatively, if I undo this, you can also use a red-green or a hot-cold background, which shows the same thing in perhaps a bit more of a colourful way. You can also turn one of the row fields into a column field. So this is where pivot tables get its name. You can have one field going down like the album and another field being pivoted 90 degrees, so going across. Therefore, we could have this years going across, and to do that, all we need to do is drag it from the rows area to the columns area. In this way, you'll be able to get more analysis on a page, and it may be easier to understand. Suppose you wanted to group albums into various eras, such as Romantic, Classic, and Baroque, or years into decades. Now you can do this by adding an extra column to the original data, but you can do this more directly in the pivot table. To do this, drag the relevant albums into adjacent cells. So maybe I decide I don't want opera there, so I'm going to put opera and an audio guide right at the bottom. So let's say I wanted to group all of these. So I've highlighted the albums I want to be added into a tables group. I can right and click on them and then go to Group. They have now been grouped together into one big Group 1, which I will call Music, and then all the others are together at the bottom in separate groups. So let's group these two together and call this Opera, and then I'll call this one Audio. So what are pivot tables to me? To me, they are an essential part of my Excel weaponry. When I receive new data, they allow me to get an initial view of that data to see whether it is complete. For example, it may be missing data from a particular year. That's happened to me in the past. It allows me to see what may be important in the data and to compare two different columns to see if there are any correlations or comparisons between them. Would you like to know more about pivot tables and similar topics? Well, this is just one of several topics in my course Excel in Microsoft Excel 2, Intermediate to Expert Advanced, together with advanced conditional formatting, formulas such as countifs, VLOOKUP and match, as well as Visual Basic for applications. So there'll be details in the description of this course. And I have a similar course for Mac users as well. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you're going to find out how easy pivot tables are to use in your analysis very soon. Thank you very much for watching this. I'm Philip Burton, and keep learning.